This U.S. China trade dispute, as you've written, is about so much more than trade. But let's deal with trade first. You see some sort of limited face-saving agreement being reached in the near term. What would that look like?
Well, I'm still betting, but it's only sort of maybe 51-49, that over the next couple of months, we'll see Lighthizer and Mnuchin reach an agreement with Liu He that will forego further tariff increases and probably include some reduction in the current tariffs. And that'll be good enough for Xi and Trump to declare victory for the time being, but it'll be only a temporary victory in a larger hostile relationship that I think is destined to get worse before it gets worse.
Let's talk about the hostile relationship, because what does it say about the rationale behind the relationship between the U.S. and China if you go from what you thought would become a strategic partner to a strategic adversary? Where are we headed now, and how do you break that impasse?
A very good question. So basically, I've written about this as a Thucydidean dynamic. China is a meteoric rising power. The U.S. is a colossal ruling power. When a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, for the last 2,500 years, alarm bells should sound. Generally, it doesn't turn out well. So in the entire relationship, which previously had been thought to be a strategic partnership, each are coming to see the other more hostilely as a strategic rival, or indeed a strategic competitor, or a strategic adversary. And trade is one part of that, but supply chains, critical elements, investments, military, every dimension of the relationship is now being reformulated and reshaped through the lens of this Thucydidean dynamic.
And Professor Allison, you give a number of recommendations at the end of your book for how the two countries can avoid a complete fallout, including avoiding this passive-aggressive diplomacy and unapologetically pursuing their own national interests. How would you characterize the nature of diplomacy between the U.S. and China right now, and how does that impede the way to a lasting deal here?
Well, unfortunately, just as the previous question, the relationship is now regarded, especially from Washington, through a lens of a more and more hostile relationship. And the consequence of that is that people are neglecting the reasons why the U.S. and China are linked together in ways that will be impossible to decouple. Both parties have robust nuclear arsenals. If they should be dragged into a war by a third party, nobody can survive. So clearly, that's a vital national interest. Both live on a small globe in which anybody emitting greenhouse gases emit them into the same biosphere. So we have a shared interest in trying to do something about that. In fact, and I think that if we think about the financial crisis of 2008, both U.S. and China recognized they had a shared interest in preventing this becoming another Great Depression. So I think the relationship needs to get balanced by an appreciation of the reasons why the two countries have to cooperate. At the same time, there are many reasons why they're going to find themselves competing and being rivals.
You point out in your book that the Chinese are strategically patient and completely comfortable waiting a long period of time to solve a problem. So how do you think the China side views this current dispute with America in the context of its 5, 10, or even 100-year development goals?
Very good point. Chinese can think long-term. For the U.S., Friday is long-term. So this makes for an asymmetry that's significant here. I think as far as I can read Beijing at this point, they are hoping that Trump is an anomaly. But as they watch the whole Washington political class, Democrats as well as Republicans, now seeing China as a strategic adversary, they worry. they're still hoping Trump will be a single-term president, and if that can happen, they think maybe things will get back on track. But they've been going through a pretty substantial strategic reassessment lately, thinking that this may last for some time. On the other hand, the China dream of making China great again is a dream for a long period. Xi Jinping's plan reaches out to 2049. So 1 year, 2 years, they can adjust in a way that I think Americans are unwilling to do.
And Graham, let's talk a little bit and sort of zoom out of what's happening between the U.S. and China, because it seems that the Trump administration is not only having trade issues with China, but even with France, we're expecting potentially tariffs because of these Airbus and Boeing issues that has been going on for years. We have the Trump administration talking about the USMCA being all political. So where does this put the United States when it comes to its relationship to the world and trade and protectionism?
Well, there's something charming about this, because at Davos in 2017, after the U.S. had both trashed the WTO, withdrawn from TPP, walked away from Paris, Xi Jinping was celebrated as the paragon of the liberal international economic order. He was as surprised as anybody. In fact, I talked to one of the people who worked on his speech for Davos, and they said they could hardly keep from smiling, when he had these various lines. So because the U.S. in the Trump administration has decided basically to have tariff conflicts with everybody, with Japan, with South Korea, with EU, with France, just as you said, as well as with China, China has been able actually to say they're the responsible member of the WTO, and the U.S. is the rogue. So there's something charming about this from a Chinese perspective and stupid from an American perspective.
I just want to get your thoughts on some comments that we saw from the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi this week. He was warning the United States that it's a, quote, playing with fire when it comes to selling arms to Taiwan. How much of a risk is this to well, not just the trade talks, but to the relationship more broadly?
I think it's a big risk. I think that the impulses in the Trump administration, and even more in some parts of Congress, to play with Taiwan is playing with fire. So in my list of ways in which the U.S. and China could actually get dragged into a real war, a real bloody shooting war, Taiwan is right at the top of that list. And if in the current campaign for president in Taiwan, which is currently going on, the election is in January, if a candidate who is making a move towards greater independence should win, I believe the Chinese will not live with that. And if they don't live with it, especially if they were to react violently, as they did in 1996, the U.S. is going to be left in a pretty tough spot. If it supports Taiwan significantly, it'll risk a war with China. If it doesn't, it'll be shown to have been bluffing. So I think this is very dangerous.